Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to Work in Progress, our personal productivity podcast. I'm your host, Joanna, and today we're going to be talking about self-efficacy, and we're going to dive into how we can overcome imposter syndrome with self-efficacy and help increase our productivity as well. So joining me today is our guest, Mahima Didwania. Mahima is a clinical psychologist with a specialisation in anxiety and trauma, and she's also passionate about inner child work to help grow into the best version of ourselves. And on top of that, Mahima also loves teaching, and she hosts workshops and helps support other psychologists. Hi Mahima, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey Joanna, and thank you for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Before we get started, I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what it is you do.
So I'm based in Singapore. I'm working with teens and adults, and I kind of support them through the whole gamut of issues they could be facing, whether that's anxiety, relationships, work stress, body image issues, depression, personality disorders, all of that. So kind of really anything that might be holding them back from a sense of well-being, from a sense of being happy, feeling good about themselves, and being able to create the lives that they want. And I kind of use different modalities, so not only cognitive psychotherapy, I am more body-based and more emotion-based. So I use things like hypnotherapy, EFT tapping, schema therapy to do more deep-rooted work where kind of I work with long-standing patterns. I work on core memories, and I work in ways where we bridge what we call the mind and heart gap, where a lot of times people get it, but I know I should be doing XYZ, or I should not be thinking in this way, but I can't seem to help it. So I help people kind of create changes which are more internalized, which are more long-lasting, and which feel a bit kind of more true for themselves as well.
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
Amazing. And what inspired you to get into this sort of line of work?
I think people are so fascinating. This is work which gives me new insights and interesting stories every day. So I love what I learn. I love the ability to make a difference. And when I kind of see the transformations happening and someone coming in stressed or upset and kind of carrying all that load and then blossoming into something lighter, something happier, that really just makes my day. It's also really fascinating to be able to actually understand how the human mind works and, what makes people what they are. So I think it's sheer fascination.
Yeah, and you put it really beautifully, like when you get to see someone come in and they're struggling and then see them leave and they're feeling better. I feel like that would be such a great thing to experience as well. And how long have you been working in this field for?
I have now been working in this for 14 years.
Wow. And before that, were you always doing this?
Yes, so this is my first career. I studied psychology and so I've been doing this from day one. And it's interesting. So of course, as we keep picking up also different modalities and we keep learning. That's the other thing. It's an ever growing journey, even for myself. So I think that keeps it fresh, that keeps me connected to it as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And before we jump into everything for today, we have a section called Have You Met Mahima? So here we just ask you some get to know you questions. So my first one for you is, what is your favorite book, or do you have one?
My favorite book, it's childish, but I think it's still Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I think that was the main book that kind of made me fall in love with reading and, helped me escape and kind of really experience the world full of magic. And as much as I've loved books after that, but that is still the one series that I hold most closely to my heart.
Yeah. Oh, I love Harry Potter. I haven't read the books, unfortunately, but I've watched all the movies and it's
Oh,
really
you must
amazing.
read the books. It's really not the same as well. So the movies
Oh.
are awesome, but you must read the books. It's a whole different experience.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. I'm intrigued now. I will definitely add that to my list. Speaking of movies, would you say Harry Potter's your favorite movie, or do you have a different one?
No, I wouldn't actually. I think the movies more, I would connect better. I do connect better with Bollywood movies because that's how I've grown up seeing. So
Yeah.
there's this particular Bollywood one when again I was young, which was kind of a crowd favorite. It's called DDLJ. I think I still love that.
Amazing. And what's that one about?
Oh, it's a love story, but it it has a lot of humor and it has a lot of emotion and it has kind of great music. So yeah, I love that one.
I think Bollywood movies are great. They're always so fun and so full of life, and the music is amazing. And recently, there's been a couple in the cinemas here that have looked really interesting, and I've seen like the end credits, and there's so much like music and dancing, and it's so great. I think they're so much fun to
Yeah,
watch.
yeah, yeah, they are.
Great. Well, our next question here is, do you listen to any podcasts or have a favorite?
I think I'd like to listen to more. I haven't created enough time for that, but I've liked the one. It's called Therapists Off the Clock.
Oh, okay.
You know, yeah. So they kind of take up particular topics and talk in a little more detail about it. I think that's the one that I quite enjoy. Then there's Esther Perel. So I've been kind of using
Yeah.
podcasts more, I think, for learning because it makes it easier to kind of have bite-sized things to chew on while you're doing something. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I love Esther Perel. I feel like she is such a genius and her content is so good and so relatable. Yeah, so those are really good ones.
yeah. Brené Brown is another one that I've liked.
Oh, yeah, I love Brené Brown. I recently read one of her books, Rising Strong, if you've heard of it. It's a very, very good book.
Nice, nice. I'll look it up.
Yeah, great. So we've got one more question here, which is, if you had to pick a role model, who would it be?
Hmm. I don't like. I don't have a celebrity role model that I can think of right now, but I know in my work here there are a few different people that I meet who I really look up to. Other people in my field who've already been doing this longer, who've kind of, yeah, I don't know if that's a good response, but it's, I think, more of people that I see around me.
Yeah. No, I relate to that. I feel like picking a role model is hard and I feel like it always changes.
Yeah, because different people inspire me for different things. So I don't know if I can pick one.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great response. It's hard to pick just one person who encapsulates everything you find inspirational. So I normally like to take little bits and pieces from different people, whether that be in my personal life or even just someone famous or a celebrity, even.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
Great. Well, I think we can jump into the main bit of our recording today, which is our interview questions. So, before we start, I just wanted to outline what self efficacy means to you.
Self-efficacy is the belief in our own capability to do things. So it is a little more than confidence because confidence can often be something that we project outside. Self-efficacy is more of what I feel inside. It's how stable I feel, how strong I feel, how capable I feel that if I need to do some tasks, if I need to kind of do something in life, I do have the ability to do it successfully, to be able to complete it, to be able to get through it.
Yeah, and it seems like a bit of a complex sort of concept, but how does one develop self-efficacy? Is it something we're born with? Is it something we grow over time?
I don't think it's something we're born with. It is a skill. It is something also based on our experiences that I think does develop over time. Now, unfortunately, the most common thing that we see across the people that come is a sense of inadequacy. Like when we really drill down into what brings them to therapy, often what's a big source of pain. For a lot of people, it is the feeling that they're not good enough.
Yeah.
And self-efficacy, in a way, is the opposite of that. Yeah. So it's kind of what we all need in our life as well. It is from experiences, and also it is from how we interpret those experiences, right? The lens that we see it from, the meaning that we give to it, the story that we tell ourselves. That's what will help us build self-efficacy over time, over our life.
Yeah, 100%. And like when you said before, self-efficacy, the opposite of it is not feeling good enough. So if we're thinking of this idea of not feeling good enough, I guess we could link it to imposter syndrome. So in terms of that, how would you define imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is when you feel this fear that you're going to be found out as a fraud.
Yeah.
When you kind of find yourself, say, in a work position, you have a particular role, you have these responsibilities and you're doing it, but deep down you feel like you actually don't know what you're doing. You don't have the skills, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the ability, and you're just bluffing your way around. You're just pretending to be capable. You're just pretending to know your stuff when you don't. And so you're an imposter, you're a fraud. You don't actually belong there. And that eventually you're going to be exposed. You're going to be found out. It's only a matter of time till people see you for the imposter that you really are.
And I've noticed a lot of people around me will sometimes say, oh, I feel like an imposter in my own job. And these feelings just suddenly arise. What causes someone to just suddenly feel like, they feel like an imposter in their own job?
I think there could be different things. I would probably not expect it to be completely random out of the blue. Often it's a manifestation of kind of these doubts that are already there in the background, right? So there might already be feelings of probably not being good enough, probably not being so sure about yourself. And then there could be triggers in the moment which really bring them up. The triggers could be comparisons, either by others or even by yourself, when you compare yourself to a peer or to another, person, and kind of see that, are you matching up or not? It could be comments. It could be verbal and non-verbal stuff. So there could really be different things that are happening around us which bring this up in us.
Yeah. And is there a difference between imposter syndrome and self-doubt?
I think they're related but not the same, right? So self-doubt is, I'm not sure, I'm not, so there's a little more sitting on the fence and kind of second guessing yourself. I think imposter syndrome feels a bit more deeply entrenched, that I know I'm not good enough. I know I don't know this. So you're a little more sure that you're a fraud. And it's just kind of, it's a matter of time till the ball drops. Self-doubt is a little more, it's more mental. It's more kind of, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess if we're taking it back to imposter syndrome, can you elaborate on how this sort of impacts an individual's personal and professional life?
I think imposter syndrome can really take away a sense of achievement and a sense of confidence. Because even if, for example, you've landed a good gig, which you've been really working hard for, instead of enjoying the promotion, if you're sitting and feeling that actually I don't deserve this, actually I'm just going to bomb and it's going to screw everything up, and they're going to see at the end of the day that they shouldn't have given me this position. So it really takes away from your sense of achievement. It really takes away from also your sense of stability and being able to actually relax in the position that, yes, I have got this and I'm going to be able to do this. So it leads to anxiety. It leads to what we call a sense of cognitive dissonance. Like we don't feel like we're being genuine, we're not being true, we're not being honest. So it's almost like, oh, am I just pretending? Am I just wearing a mask? So we feel in conflict with who we think we are, with who we think others think we are. And there's kind of all of this noise in our head. And it affects our confidence. It can affect your ability to focus. It can affect how much you put yourself out there, right? How much you're able to stand up for yourself, how much you're able to be confident in your own abilities and put that out there. So it can make you kind of recede in the corners a bit, simply because you don't feel confident enough to own that piece of work.
Yeah, and I guess overcoming something like this, like a quite deeply entrenched sense of doubt, would be difficult. So, what challenges would individuals face when they're trying to do this?
One is that they really believe it. So they're quite fused with it. So often, kind of, even when, say, in a therapy room, they're coming and saying that and we're talking about it, they're kind of convinced that this is the truth. And eventually, you as a therapist will also see that this is the truth.
Yeah.
So, so it's only a matter of time till even the therapist sees that actually they're not good enough. So that can be difficult. Then if they're not in a particularly supportive environment, like, we have people whose, for example, work environments or family environments are not necessarily encouraging. They don't have enough positive information, positive feedback. So they don't have that coming from the outside world. So it's even easier for it to become a confirmation bias. See, I'm not good enough. See, I'm being told to perform even more, or because that's just the culture of where they are. So that can get difficult if they have very high achieving peers or siblings or parents. So basically the standards and expectations put on them are really high because of their context. I think that can also make it difficult because
Yeah.
you always keep comparing yourself to these really high standards.
Yeah. And I feel like comparison is so easy to do, even in the workplace, because there's always people above you, there's always people below you, and you're constantly working with other people and you're seeing the work they produce. Or even with your friends, like you might be, oh, they're doing so much more than me, or, they're doing better than me. And I feel like that can really take a mental toll. So, in terms of comparison, how can we work on that and not let that influence how we see ourselves in our own workplace?
So some level of comparison is inevitable. I think we're human, so it's not really practical for us to expect people to have no comparisons at all.
Yeah.
What I do recommend is limit the amount of time and energy we invest in it. And when we are seeing that, oh, the other person seems really good at this, and they're really talented in that, and they're really successful in that, instead of taking that as proof that now you are not good enough in the same thing, instead take that as an inspiration that, wow, they're really good at it, and kind of disconnect it from, and I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
So can I notice that, wow, that's amazing, like you were mentioning about the role model, right? So can we take inspiration from others being good at something? And also then, instead of going into negative comparison of ourselves, they're really good at X, I suck at X. They're really good at X. You know what? I think I'm good at Y. And maybe X is something that I want to work on as well. So that's something that we can work on. Another thing is to make it a conscious habit to be able to also look in ourselves to find things that we appreciate about ourselves. Like there is the classic technique of keeping a gratitude journal, right?
Yeah.
Wherein every day we write down 3 things that we're grateful for, and it kind of small things, different things. It just doesn't have to be the big things in life. And I often use an alternative where it's like a pride journal. So 3 things that I'm proud of, or 3 things that I'm thankful to myself for. And it can be anything like, oh, I went and spoke up to that person today, even though I've been anxious about it. Or today I chose to eat healthy, or today I chose to kind of, give myself a break instead of being really harsh. So this is also something that can gradually build up your sense of self rather than just a constant negative comparison.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned about instead of turning it into comparison turn it into inspiration. And it made me think about how often a lot of our role models are famous people. And when we look at famous people or celebrities, we're able to take inspiration from them, but not as much people in just our day-to-day lives. And people we see around us every day, we often compare ourselves to them, but not to celebrities because we put them on two different sort of levels. And I think it's just so great if we could apply the same things to a celebrity to people in our everyday life, whether that be in our personal lives or at the workplace. You know, if someone's doing really well, not, oh, I wish I was them, or why can't I be more like them? It could be more like that. They're doing that really well. I aspire to do the same things.
Yeah, yeah. You put that really well. I agree.
Thank you. Now, I'd love to connect this idea of imposter syndrome to self-efficacy. So what do you think the connection is there?
So I'd say building self-efficacy is one of the routes to counteract imposter syndrome. So I also want to say that imposter syndrome is actually pretty common, and often, and it's not that it exists only if you're kind of struggling, if you're new at something, if it isn't really your skill set. Even if you're really smart, really capable, really, have expertise in that field, the likelihood is that you could still have imposter syndrome. But the more you build that sense of self-efficacy, that's going to be your foundation where you'd be able to counteract that. Oh, I'm just feeling that way, but that's not necessarily true. So to kind of create some diffusion from that imposter syndrome and to be able to see that, that's just a thought, or that's just kind of, me feeling a bit nervous or anxious about something. But I know deep down, I do know that I'm capable.
And if we're going through a period in our life where we do experience imposter syndrome, how can we tap into, self-efficacy tendencies and, a more positive way of looking at ourselves and our ability to do things for ourselves and get out of, periods of struggle?
So one thing for kind of if there's a period that there is significant imposter syndrome is that you need to check for anxiety. So there could be things that you need to do physically and emotionally to kind of manage the anxiety a bit better. And in terms of building self-efficacy, so one of the things that's happening in imposter syndrome or in the comparisons is that we're always looking at this lofty goal or lofty standard, almost like an ideal self, right? That I wish I was that, and because, or I need to be that, unless I'm that, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud, and an imposter.
Yeah.
So just like there is the ideal self, there is the current self, which is where I am right now. And so one way to deal with self-efficacy is instead of constantly looking at the ideal self and kind of aspiring for that, you instead look at a better self, which is not that far away from my current self, which is progress, which is growth, but it is also achievable. So again, it becomes encouraging and inspiring rather than demotivating and defeating.
Yeah.
So finding that little kind of, we call it the zone of proximal development, that little next step that you can do in your journey, which will help you feel that you're growing, you're making progress. So you set yourself up for success. That maybe, I need to kind of increase the amount of steps I take in a day. And that's something that I've been aspiring to do for a while. But instead of directly going that right now I do 4,000 steps and I'm going to do 10,000 tomorrow because that's what I need to get to, that's not happening.
Yeah.
But if you kind of increase it to 4,500 steps, maybe that's doable. So having small, achievable kind of steps to work towards different goals. Maybe in your relationships, you've been wanting to kind of spend more quality time with somebody. So putting in kind of some time for that this week. Or you've been wanting to read that book, or you've been wanting to clear off some pending tasks, respond to some long lost emails, whatever that is. So you could make in kind of the different areas of your life that are important to you. Identify what are these small steps that you need to take to feel a sense of achievement, to feel a sense of success, to feel a sense of growth. And as you do that, make time to actually acknowledge the progress. acknowledge the growth. You can keep a journal. Yeah. You can have a different kind of a visual marker. You can have a tick box or something. So basically you are taking the time for your brain to recognize that actually I did something good. Because our brain is generally busy keeping stock of all the things we did wrong. Right? So we have to train it to actually pay attention to and value the things we are doing right as well.
And I feel like that's such a good point as well. And did you have any examples of how an increased sense of self-efficacy can help someone overcome imposter syndrome?
So maybe I'll speak about myself. I've been doing this for a while now. But
Yeah.
of course, every now and then I will kind of come I feel like I'm just probably bluffing and I'm coming up with things on the fly. And yeah, it's just kind of an imposter syndrome kicking in that maybe I'm not as much of an expert as people think that I am. Maybe I'm supposed to be at this level in my career, but I'm just kind of doing whatever's coming to be. But then I have to remind myself from my sense of self-efficacy that actually I have been doing it for all this while. These are the concrete experiences I've had. This is the actual feedback I've received. These are the actual results I've received. This is how I actually feel in myself at the end of a session or at the end of a workshop where I know that good work has been done. Has there been scope of improvement? Is there scope of improvement? I'm sure there is. So it's also being realistic. We don't need to put on these red-tinted glasses and say, oh, I'm the most brilliant person in the world. So we don't need to go there. It is also about being able to see our flaws or our kind of areas of improvement as, yes, I am still a work in progress and I will always be a work in progress. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't need to be perfect to be acceptable, to be good enough. I don't need to be perfect to feel confident in my work, that unless it's amazing, unless it's perfect, it's not good enough and I'm a fraud. Because a lot of people can have this black and white approach. So I think something that's a little more multifaceted will help. That yes, maybe I didn't do this part of it great and I need to improve that, but actually these other parts were quite okay. So a sense of self-efficacy can give us a more stable sense of self-worth. That will also help when the feedback that you receive might be inconsistent, that sometimes you receive a lot of praise and at other times you don't. So a sense of self-efficacy can also make that need for consistent validation, need for consistent outside approval lesser, because that sense of worth, that sense of ability becomes a little more internal.
Yeah.
And yeah, because the other thing with imposter syndrome is even if you're receiving amazing feedback from the outside, it doesn't make it go away. Because the voice in your head is telling you they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just fooling them. They don't know the fraud that I really am. So that voice will only change from building the self-efficacy and from you knowing that even though I might be anxious or even though I have this doubts about myself, actually, practically, realistically speaking, I can do so many things.
And I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because no matter how much someone tells us that we're amazing or we're great or we're really good at what we do, it comes down to whether or not we believe that about ourselves. For example, I feel like maybe using social media, like you post on Instagram and you get a heap of comments from your friends telling you how gorgeous and beautiful you are. And yes, that is an extent of validation, but do you really believe that about yourself, or do you just believe it for the second that they tell you that? So are you really internalizing that thought of, yes, I'm great, I'm beautiful, all these different things, or are you just, leaving it at the surface and not actually believing those things yourself? And I feel like that can make a really big difference in how you carry yourself, whether or not you believe the things that are said about you. And I guess it just boils down to the fact of you have to believe in yourself, and that's when you actually truly start acting in a way that's representative of who you actually are.
Absolutely. And there is this concept called the confirmation bias. So our brain has this tendency that when we have a strong belief, so if my belief is, I don't know, I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not thin enough, or I'm not capable enough, whatever that is. our brain will focus on and kind of exaggerate any information that we feel supports that belief. And it will dismiss and discount information that goes against it. So we kind of cherry pick information that confirms our beliefs and we disregard the others. So for example, if I feel like I'm not good enough at my work, right? Any positive feedback that I receive, I will discount it. They don't know what, they're just being nice. They don't know of all the mistakes I've done, all of those things. Whereas any negative feedback I receive, or even the lack of feedback, see, that's because I didn't do well, right? So so we do have this filter, like in your social media post. So if someone doesn't believe that they're actually beautiful, even if they receive 100 comments saying that, they'll say, oh, it's just the filter. It's just the lighting. It's just that dress that I'm wearing. Or they're just being nice. They're my friends. That's what they're supposed to say.
Yeah.
But if there's a single troll, see, it's the troll that sees their truth. They are the one who's kind of seeing through them and actually seeing what they really look like. So we do have this. And like in an imposter syndrome, you will probably be much more vigilant of any negative feedback, of any criticisms, of any areas where you mess up. And you might kind of end up disregarding actual proof that you're okay, you're doing okay.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how we're so quick to pick up on something negative and convince ourselves that that's true when all the other signs or all the other messages you're getting around you indicate the opposite, that it's not true. And I find it really interesting why we latch onto that negativity and turn it into something that it's not, or convince ourselves that that's true when we might be reading too much into it or trying to make it something it's not.
Yeah, often these are messages that we've learned while we're growing up. It could be things that we've picked up from our parents, from our peers, or kind of various ways that our self-concept has been molded. So it can be really sticky, people feel that that's just how I am. I don't want to feel that way about myself, but I can't seem to help it. So it can be a little tricky in unpicking that. And so that can be challenging.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd love to jump into our practices and habits section where we can kind of, flesh this out a bit more with some practical strategies. So, my first one is, do you have a strategy or a practice that you could recommend to help improve self-efficacy?
I think what you could do is, so it can be a very broad thing, right? So I would ask the person to pick up probably 2 or 3 areas in their life where they feel like they'd like to feel more confident and capable. It could be something around the home, it could be something with their personal health, it could be work, it could be something else, but not too many. Within that, prioritize. So, for example, what do you need to feel more capable with managing your finances, for example, right? And rather than it just being a vague concept, I would actually help them identify specific steps and tasks they can do. That, okay, I need to figure out how to use the banking system. I would like to know a little more about investments. I would like to be more aware of the tax policies, whatever that is, right? So actually flesh out some specific detailed elements of what it is they need to do. Get the help that they need. So for example, if it's a fitness goal, do you need to join a gym? Do you need to get a trainer? Do you need to get a workout buddy? So create the systems that help set you up for success and not depend solely on your own motivation or your own kind of belief that, yes, I can do it, because that's the thing that we're actually trying to help you with. So it is natural for that to dip. And then you can make a step-by-step plan that this week or this month, this is what I'm going to try to work on and achieve. And if I struggle with that, then we look at it more from a troubleshooting perspective. That, okay, how do I need to approach this differently? What support do I need to be able to overcome this? So like looking at it like a ladder. So what's the next step that I need to focus on? What's the next step that I need to focus on? And then at the end of the day, having some time to reflect on it and actually acknowledge and appreciate that, yes, I did do that. And are there also checking kind of Are there different areas in your life, perhaps, where you have been depending on other people for stuff which has taken away your own sense of self-efficacy? Because that's another thing that breeds a lack of it. When we end up depending on others for certain tasks consistently, it's like we forget that we're capable of doing them.
Yeah.
Just because you haven't practiced it for a while, and then you end up starting to lose confidence in it and almost feeling a bit anxious when you do have to do it.
Yeah.
So taking some of those reins back in becoming more and more independent in your day-to-day life or in those particular tasks, even if you could kind of, give it off to other people. But if you can, if it doesn't add too much burden, if it is something practical, and if it is something that will make you feel more capable, kind of, something as simple as like, now I don't really cook regularly anymore. I don't need to. I have a system in place where somebody else does it for me. And I'm more than capable of it, but because I haven't done it for such a long time, now I feel a bit nervous at the thought of it. That, oh my God, I'll have to figure it out again. I need to do this and do that and do that. But when I actually start doing it, I realize that it's not that big a deal. And I do know how to do it. So if I do it a bit here and there, and I kind of continue staying in practice, that builds my self-efficacy, that actually I know I can manage that. It's not overwhelming anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Another related concept is the concept of emotional efficacy. Emotional efficacy is the understanding, is the belief that if I go through distress, if I go through pain, if I go through something that, is upsetting, is scary, is whatever it is, I have the capacity to bear it, to tolerate it, to cope with it, and to get on the other side without being overwhelmed with it, without it breaking me down. And that's something that's also really important in your ability to be able to really take on life without as much fear.
Definitely. And I think this idea of, emotional efficacy is hard to build up when you lack independence, I think, or when you rely too much on other people or your relationships to sort of build that for you. Because I feel like in terms of emotions, we rely a lot on other people to help us feel certain ways. And when we can't do that for ourselves, we really feel like we're not capable. And I guess that sense of self doubt and that doubt that contributes to imposter syndrome really comes in when we're standing on our own. We're like, oh, wow, I can't actually do this without someone else doing it for me. So when we realize something like that, how do we go about building that on our own as opposed to always relying on people around us to do that?
So it would again be a step-by-step process. So this is kind of what we're talking about is dependency, right? Where we think that we need another person to be able to regulate, to be able to comfort us when something happens, to be able to guide us, hold us, really almost to parent us in a way, right? And the process of building emotional efficacy would involve gradually step by step pausing before we go for comfort. It's not about becoming an isolated island where you have to brave it out and do everything yourself, but it is about kind of shifting that balance. So if something upsets us, something scares us, pausing and seeing if you can regulate it yourself first. So you would need a toolbox, you would need strategies, you would need to find different ways which actually help, and that's different for different people. So things like breathing strategies, things like journaling, things like going for a walk, things. So there are many different things which we use to be able to regulate our own emotions. So it is about sitting with the distress enough for your body, for your mind to be able to regulate it. And then kind of going back and doing what needs to be done instead of immediately going to someone else for support. Of course, if the situation is big, if the distress is too high, if the self-regulation is not enough, it's okay to ask for support, but it is about gradually almost weaning yourself off a bit so that you feel more independent and confident that actually I can handle this on my own. Yes, I can share it with my partner, with my friend if I want to, but it's not as much that I absolutely need someone to be there for me to be able to survive this and get through this.
Yeah. And I like that idea of sitting in the distress and sort of
allowing yourself to be there and sort of get yourself through it, because often when we start to feel a certain way, we reach out to other things and other people as a way to alleviate that distress or that negative feeling, as opposed to sitting in it on our own and allowing ourselves to overcome it.
Yeah, another thing that often happens is avoidance, that we just avoid it. We distract ourselves or we avoid it in a bunch of ways, which again just breeds fear, just breeds anxiety, just breeds more of the imposter syndrome, and it reduces your sense of self-efficacy, because the message that's going to your brain is that, it's too much for me. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. So, in a way, you start feeling weaker and weaker. And we need to change that yes, even though it's scary, even though I'm not sure what to do it, you know what? Okay, I got this. So self-compassion is another thing that would really help with self-efficacy, because one of the things that kind of chips away at it is our inner critic, which is constantly judging us, which is constantly telling us that, oh, what you did should have been better, and see kind of really focusing on our mistakes, really kind of negative comparisons, all of that. And we need to gradually change that into a more self-compassionate coach or a mentor, someone who actually builds us up rather than just kind of nitpicks us at us and tears us down.
Yeah, definitely. And what are some of the challenges that come along with sort of working on building self-efficacy?
People are not sure how to do it. So they might not know the process of developing it. The belief of I'm actually not good enough might be too strong.
Yeah.
So that inner critic constantly giving them the message that, actually, you're not good enough, you're inadequate. What are you even doing? Might be too loud and too strong for them to fight with. Yeah. They might be too overwhelmed. I think sometimes people can make the goals too many or too high and end up kind of setting themselves up for frustration or failure. That can come in the way of self-efficacy. Sometimes they might not have the support systems they need to kind of take the next step and they take the next step. So, I think these are some of the things that come in between our self-efficacy, to actually have the opportunity as well to get the experience that you need to build it.
Yeah. And in terms of like how this impacts our productivity, so say we're able to build on our self efficacy, obviously I can see how that would help in terms of imposter syndrome, because you're able to be more productive at work and get things done more effectively and efficiently. But how does this improve our productivity in our personal life?
Because when you have more self-efficacy, it is expected to reduce the level of anxiety and self-doubt you have. Otherwise, this self-doubt and inner critic is taking up a lot of mental space. Where you're judging yourself, you're second-guessing yourself, you're criticizing yourself. So a lot of your resources are actually being spent in trying to deal with that. But when you have more self-efficacy, you just have more capacity to actually focus on the things you want to focus, to be able to accept and not beat yourself up for things that are hard or for things that you're struggling with, understanding that's okay, that's a part of the process. So you can have a more kind of solution-focused, productivity-focused approach, instead of making things as judgments of yourself and then feeling bad about it, criticizing yourself, feeling defeated, having to overcome that, still again finding the motivation, again finding the drive to kind of still go forward. So really a load of emotional and physical and mental energy gets used up in that.
Yeah.
With better self-efficacy, you just have more capacity to focus on what you want to, instead of fighting those demons.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like a lot of what we're talking about can't be done in just a day or a week. Like, it takes time to develop all of this. And as great as it sounds, I feel like people shouldn't beat themselves up if they can't get it right the first time they try to build these up, or, if it takes them a while to do
Absolutely.
this.
It's like building a muscle and building a habit. You cannot expect it to change in a day or even a week. And in fact,
Yeah.
often things like these have built up over years and decades. So
Yeah.
you also can't expect to just, overwrite it immediately. But it's good to know that you can overwrite it. Just
Yeah.
because you felt a particular way for years doesn't mean that you have to feel that way forever. Our brain is more than capable of changing. There is neuroplasticity. That means physically our brain is capable of forming new pathways and new ways of thinking and being, with consistent intentional practice and experience. So that's the key word: consistent, intentional practice.
Exactly. And I feel like if you have the intention to be better and improve yourself, I feel like that's already a really great start, because you're aware that, there are these things I need to work on and I will get there. I just, having that awareness is key as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us and some valuable advice as well. This brings us to our last part of today, which is our open mic section. So here we just open up the floor for you to talk about anything that you would like to.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I'd like to share with people about EFT tapping. So EFT is emotional freedom techniques. This is a tapping technique where we stimulate, these particular points in our hands and our face, which are actually acupressure points. And they're linked to something called the primovascular system of our body. There are tiny blood vessels running through these specific points, which connect to our amygdala, which is the threat center of the brain, and the other organs of the body. So what this system does is, in this, we connect to some stress in our body or an emotional pain point. It could be sadness, it could be anxiety, it could be something that a negative experience brings up and how we feel. We connect with it and then we tap with our hands and fingers while we are connected to that problem. And what that does is it actually discharges this distress in the body. Okay, and it actually releases the negative emotion, the physical discomfort, and it sends safety signals to our brain, which helps us then rewire how that memory, how that experience is being stored for us as well. So often this is something that's really useful for aches and pains, for headaches, for stress, for anxiety. It is also something that's being used heavily for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because it can really help our mind and our body process the trauma that we went through and kind of come to the other side where it becomes more of a neutral memory from our past rather than something that can still kind of really grip us in the moment and continue to impact us in our future.
I've tried tapping. There's this meditation app, I think, called Tapping Solution. And it's really interesting. It like guides you through like meditations and you tap through it. And I found that it's really good for people as well who can't really sit still and just, close their eyes and follow a guided meditation. Like this actually gets you moving. And it's a really great way to actually feel connected to what you're doing.
Yes, it is. And it's also really great for self-regulation. So tapping is one of the most powerful self-help techniques I've ever come across. And it's something that I teach all my clients as a take-home tool. That when there's something happening in your life, instead of running, avoiding, or anything else, this is something that you can do to actually quickly calm down and be able to deal with the situation in a healthy way. So in fact, now that you remind me of the tapping solution, the Tapping World Summit is coming up. It's a free 10-day event for anyone to register. They have a few topics every day that you can listen in with experts from around the world, and they'll be tapping along with it. So I think that's also a great way. Maybe by the time the podcast is up, it would already have happened, but it's something to look up online, and that's a great resource for the public as well.
Oh, wow, that's really amazing. And you say that you like to give your clients, take home sort of tapping, methods that they can use. So, what would be something you would recommend for someone who wants to try tapping?
So generally for my clients, I would teach them tapping in session, and then I would kind of give them a handout of the points of the process. And I would ask them to kind of practice it with whatever they are facing in the moment. But there are plenty of resources available online, like the tapping solution being one of them, the app, right? There are plenty of YouTube videos also you could look up. So one way is you pick something that you would like to tap on, and it could be anxiety, it could be sleep, it could be, I don't know, stress, it could be aches and pains. So pick something that's bothering you that you think, you would like to feel better about, and YouTube EFT tapping for. So for example, tapping for anxiety. and you'd find videos of people doing the tapping, and you can tap along with it. There's someone called Brad Yates, an EFT Universe. He's also someone who generally puts out a lot of videos of tapping. So I think there are a lot of resources available online for someone to really try it out for themselves. And then if you like it, if it works for you, you could always seek out either a practitioner or even kind of learning it for yourself so that you can use it for your own mental health and even to support friends and family.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mahima, for sharing that with us. And I think tapping is really great and something that everyone can try. If you've ever tried meditation and you're like, oh, maybe it isn't for me, there's so many different variations of it. For example, like tapping, that could work really well. So thank you for sharing that
Yes,
with
and there
us.
are no side effects. You can't really get it wrong. And there are actual physiological changes happening in your brain and body. So for me, tapping was one of the things where you actually feel real-time change quite immediately. It's
Yeah.
something that you feel that, oh, I feel different. I'm not feeling as heavy anymore, as tight anymore. I can kind of, I'm feeling more relaxed immediately. So it was one of those undeniable shifts for me. It's very
Yeah.
tangible. It's also very quick. It's not something that's happening after, 10 hours or even a 1 hour of sitting and meditating. It's actually happening in minutes. So I feel it's really powerful, and I believe that it's something that everyone should know to just be able to regulate themselves.
Yeah, and there's so many resources out there, like there's apps and websites and videos on YouTube. So it's definitely very accessible.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That brings us to the end of today's episode. But yeah, I've had so much fun talking about this topic, and I feel like imposter syndrome is something that a lot of people go through, but there isn't really a space to talk about it because obviously some people feel embarrassed by feeling these emotions, especially in the workplace, where a place where you're supposed to be professional and you're not supposed to let your guard down on things like this. So it's really great we can create a space to talk about it.
Yes. So I would like kind of people to know that this is very common and you're not alone. Sometimes what can happen is even if they share with somebody that, oh, I feel this, it can be dismissed and, oh, no, you're great. What are you even talking about? Don't think about
Yeah.
it. And that can be discouraging because for them, it is very real. So, don't lose hope. You will kind of find the right person who can support you through that and also just work on building your own self-efficacy because ultimately you need to believe it.
Beautiful. Well, if people want to find out more about your work, some resources, where can they find you?
So I can be found on the website of theotherclinic.sg, or I can be found on lodestarwithin.com. It is LODESTAR within, WITHIN.com. Or LinkedIn or Facebook, yeah.
Perfect. Well, we've also got Mahima's details down in the description below. To everyone listening, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Work in Progress, the Personal Productivity Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website pp.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.